The truth about marriage. No one tells you. I used to think marriage was mostly about choosing the right person and then doing my best not to mess it up. That's what I believed when I was young, and if I'm honest, it's what I believed for a long time after that too. I thought love was something you either had or didn't, something strong people could hold on to if they worked hard enough. Over the years, I learned that marriage is not as dramatic as people make it, and not as simple either. It's quieter. It's made of ordinary days that don't look like much while you're living them, but later turn out to be everything. When my wife and I were first married, I paid close attention to the big things. I wanted to be a good provider. I wanted to make the right decisions. I wanted to feel respected. I thought those were the pillars that held a marriage up. I didn't notice how much weight was carried by the small things instead. The tone of voice you use when you're tired. Whether you look up when the other person walks into the room. Whether you assume kindness or assume intent. No one tells you how often marriages are shaped not by the arguments you remember, but by the moments you don't think are important enough to remember at all. There were years when I thought we were doing fine, simply because nothing terrible was happening. We paid our bills. We raised our children. We showed up to family events together. From the outside, it probably looked steady. From the inside, there were long stretches where we were just surviving alongside each other. I didn't understand then that stability and closeness are not the same thing. You can live under the same roof for decades and still slowly drift apart if you stop being curious about each other's inner world. One of the hardest lessons I learned too late was how easily love can turn into routine without you noticing. You don't wake up one morning and decide to take your partner for granted. It happens quietly. You stop saying thank you for things that once felt like gifts. You stop asking how their day really was. You assume they already know you care. Over time, that assumption becomes a kind of silence. And silence has a way of growing heavier the longer it sits between two people. I used to think arguments were the real danger. I worried about saying the wrong thing or losing my temper. What I didn't see was that indifference is far more destructive than anger. Anger still means you care. Silence often means you've stopped believing it matters. Some of our worst moments weren't the loud ones. They were the evenings when we sat in the same room, each of us lost in our own thoughts, not reaching for each other because it felt easier not to. There were times I was convinced I was right, and I fought hard to prove it. I won those arguments. I remember the feeling of satisfaction that came with being correct, with having logic on my side. What I didn't feel at the time was the cost. Winning an argument can feel good in the moment, but it can leave a bruise you don't notice until much later. Marriage is not a courtroom, even though we often treat it like one. No one really wins when one person feels unheard. As the years passed, life got heavier. Responsibilities piled up. Worries about money, health, and the future crept in. We both changed, as people always do, but we didn't always change together. I assumed we were still aligned simply because we had history. I believed the past would carry us forward on its own. That was another quiet misunderstanding. Shared history is powerful, but it's not self-sustaining. It needs attention the same way a living thing does. One of the truths no one tells you is that love is not always a feeling you can rely on. Some days it's a choice you make without much emotion behind it. There were mornings when affection came easily, and others when it felt distant and dull. I thought that meant something was wrong. I see now that it was normal. Love ebbs and flows, but commitment is what stays when the feeling thins out. I wish I had trusted that more instead of panicking or pulling away. Also wish I had listened more without preparing my response. I spent too many conversations focused on what I was going to say next instead of truly hearing what my wife was trying to tell me. Sometimes she wasn't asking for a solution. She was asking to be understood. That difference took me far too long to learn. When someone feels understood, they soften. When they feel corrected, they retreat. There's a particular kind of regret that comes from realizing you could have been kinder without sacrificing anything important. Kindness doesn't require you to give up your values or your dignity. It just asks you to remember that the person in front of you is human, flawed and trying in their own way. I thought being strong meant being firm. I didn't realize how much strength there is in gentleness. As we grew older, the pace of life slowed down, but our habits stayed the same. That's another thing time teaches you. You can carry the same patterns into every stage of life if you don't stop to examine them. I assumed we would naturally grow closer once things got quieter. Instead, we brought old distances into a calmer setting, where they became harder to ignore. Silence is louder when there's nothing else making noise. I remember moments when my wife reached out in small ways and I missed them. A comment she made in passing, a sigh I didn't ask about, a look that lingered just a second longer than usual. At the time, I was distracted or tired or convinced it could wait. I didn't understand that those moments were invitations. You don't always get another chance to accept them. What marriage really teaches you, if you let it, is humility. It shows you the parts of yourself you'd rather not see. Your impatience, your defensiveness, your tendency to protect your pride at the expense of connection. I spent years thinking my flaws were manageable as long as I wasn't hurting anyone on purpose. Intent matters, but impact matters too. Love doesn't erase the effects of neglect, even unintentional neglect. There is also joy in marriage that doesn't get talked about much because it doesn't photograph well. It's the comfort of being known. It's the way two people develop a shared language, made of glances and half-sentences. It's the relief of not having to explain everything. I had that, and for a long time I didn't treat it with the care it deserved. Familiarity is a gift, but only if you remember it is one. As I look back now, I see that marriage is less about staying in love and more about staying present. Being present when things are boring. Being present when they're uncomfortable. Being present when you'd rather retreat into yourself. Presence is what builds trust over decades. It's what turns ordinary time into shared life. One of the quiet truths is that you don't marry the same person forever. You marry many versions of them. Some are easier to love than others. The same is true for you. The mistake I made was expecting consistency instead of growth. Change is not betrayal. It's evidence that someone is alive. When you resist your partner's changes, you end up resisting your own future as well. I also learned that apologies matter more than explanations. I was good at explaining myself. I could tell you exactly why I reacted the way I did. What I struggled with was simply saying I was sorry and leaving it there. An apology is not a debate, it's a bridge. You don't build bridges by defending why the gap exists. There came a time when loss entered my life in a way I was not prepared for. Loss has a way of sharpening your understanding. It strips away the stories you told yourself and leaves you with what actually mattered. I realized then how many moments I had assumed would always be there. Conversations I thought we'd have later. Affection I postponed. Gratitude I kept to myself. Time is generous until it suddenly isn't. If I could pass on one hard-earned insight, it would be this. Marriage doesn't fall apart all at once. It fades at the edges when you stop tending to it, and it grows stronger in the same quiet way, through small acts done consistently. A touch on the shoulder. A sincere question. A willingness to pause your own thoughts to make room for someone else's. I don't believe marriage is meant to make you happy all the time. I believe it's meant to make you more honest, more patient, and more aware of your capacity to love imperfectly. Happiness comes and goes. Character stays. Marriage reveals who you are when no one else is watching. Now at 70, I understand that the real measure of a marriage is not how flawless it looked, but how willing two people were to keep turning toward each other, even after disappointment, especially after disappointment. Love is not proven by grand gestures. It's proven by staying, listening, and choosing again, long after the excitement has faded. These are things I didn't fully understand while I was living them. Time has a way of turning experience into wisdom, whether you ask for it or not. If I sound reflective now, it's because reflection is what remains when the noise of striving quiets down. Marriage at its best is not a destination you reach. It's a way of walking beside someone, learning as you go and realizing, sometimes too late, just how much those steps meant.